At least 3 fertility clinics in Alabama have now paused in vitro fertilization, or IVF, after the Alabama Supreme Court ruled that frozen embryos in a lab have the same rights as children. The fallout sending shockwaves throughout the state and sending Republican politicians scrambling.
Do you have a reaction to the Alabama Supreme Court ruling on the fact that embryos are children?
Yeah, I was all for it. We need to have more kids. We need to have an opportunity to do that. And I thought this was the right thing to do.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard.
So he's saying, let's take a woman's right to have more kids because we need to have more kids. Sounds like GOP logic to me.
IVF is used to have more children, and right now IVF services are paused at some of the clinics in Alabama. Aren't you concerned that this could impact people who are trying to have kids?
Well, that's for another conversation.
This was Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville of Alabama seemingly struggling to grasp the contradictory situation women have been placed in after a state Supreme Court ruled that frozen embryos are children. When he was asked on Thursday what he would say to women currently denied the fertility treatment, the former college football coach replied in the same sentence, he's all for it, and that we need more kids. But when pressed on whether the ruling would negatively affect people who are trying hard to conceive, Tuberville deflected that it was for, quote, another conversation.
People need to have, we need more kids. We need the people to have the opportunity to have kids.
Senator, what do you say to the women right now in Alabama who no longer have access to IVF, or who will not, as a result of this ruling? What do you say to them?
Well, that's a hard one. It really is. It's really hard. Because, again, you want people to have that opportunity. And that's what I was telling her. We need more kids.
Respectfully, sir, it may not seem like a top issue to you or maybe to folks that you've been speaking with, but people vote on the issue of abortion restrictions across the country, and more so after the overturning of Roe versus Wade. South Carolina has a 6-week abortion ban in place. And outside of cheering for the Supreme Court when they overturned Roe, Trump historically hasn't really been specific on giving his precise answer to the issue of when abortion restrictions should kick in. He defended that ambiguity, as we just played a soundbite of last night. Do you think Republicans have a problem with this issue? You're saying that we should focus on things like gas prices, et cetera. But for a lot of women out there, this is issue number one.
Well, look, that issue will be debated, I assume. But again, let's leave it to the states. And if you go on Main Street USA and tell them to name the top 10 troubling spots that the country faces, I doubt embryos, the decision in Alabama with the embryo situation or their views in Alabama would come to the top of the list.
You see, IVF is extremely popular. I mean, extremely popular. As Kellyanne Conway's own polling firm found, 86% of all voters support access to IVF, including 78% of self-identified pro-life advocates and 83% of evangelical Christians.
The Alabama Supreme Court ruling that happened essentially said that embryos that are created in IVF are legally protected like a child. At least 3 healthcare facilities providing IVF in the state have closed. We're going to see a lot more of that happen and more major developments because this case is so new. The reason why this came about is because a few embryos of a family were destroyed and they brought a wrongful death claim in a civil lawsuit. Of course, you can't have a wrongful death unless you have a person. The Supreme Court in Alabama said that the wrongful death claim could be pursued because the embryos were legally children. I don't see how any healthcare facility in Alabama continues to do IVF, not only because of the fact that a wrongful death claim is so severe if you have a mistake with an embryo. But if this is a legal child now, according to the Supreme Court, I could see there being criminal penalties as well. If you have, an involuntary manslaughter charge, if you have negligence with the destruction of the embryo. The ripple effects is not just in Alabama. We're going to see this in all states that have very stringent abortion rules. We're seeing in Texas, the woman Amanda Zarowski, who's one of the women suing Texas right now, challenging the abortion law there. She was denied a medically necessary abortion until she was near death. They waited so long that she ended up going into sepsis and having to stay in the ICU. So she's now suing the state as a result of that. But also she's going through IVF because her doctors say that she can't try to carry another child. She has embryos in the state of Texas, and after the Alabama ruling, guess what? She's worried about those embryos and is planning on transporting her embryos out of the state of Texas so that way she can continue with her IVF. This is the state of where women are in America dealing with this situation. The women in Alabama are certainly affected. It's already so, if you're going through IVF, it is already a last resort. It is so difficult emotionally, medically, financially. And now you have the Alabama Supreme Court now making it even harder for you to try to bring life into the world. And it's also going to be a ripple effect to other states that have these severe abortion laws. And they're going to make it more difficult for the women and the families there to procreate and bring another life in the world through IVF. Again, this is somebody's last resort with IVF.
And so I think this is a very, very dangerous moment, not just for our nation's physicians, but for American women in general, because the world is looking at us. IVF is something that is so deeply personal. My generation of millennial women of childbearing age, I myself have 3 children. We cannot believe this is where we are. When we talk about the fertility journeys that we have, they are deeply emotional, psychological, and not to mention economically take a great toll. When you're talking about embryos and that whole process, I really think the Republican Party will pay for this.
We want to build a family, and I think that should be our choice.
Emily Capolito and her husband James stored their embryos at the University of Alabama, Birmingham. It's the biggest of 3 providers that have now halted new IVF treatments, the process used by 238,000 Americans every year to help get pregnant.
This is an incredibly grueling physical, mental, and emotional process.
The couple has spent more than $50,000 on treatments over 2 years and had hoped to schedule their first embryo transfer next month.
I do feel like that timeline is in jeopardy. We are on an indefinite pause.
And in a shocking concurring opinion, and already a shocking legal opinion, the Chief Justice, Tom Parker, who is an elected Republican, doesn't even try to pretend that there's any scientific or legal argument for classifying embryos as children. He feels completely safe in these times that we live in to use a purely religious reason for this legal ruling. It is so shocking and absurd to have this in a legal opinion that I'm just going to go ahead and quote him. He says, quote, "In summary, the theologically based view of the sanctity of life adopted by the people of Alabama encompasses the following. 1, God made every person in his image. 2, each person therefore has a value that far exceeds the ability of human beings to calculate. And 3, human life cannot be wrongfully destroyed without incurring the wrath of a holy God who views the destruction of his image as an affront to himself." End quote. His willingness to completely forget about the separation of church and state in this country is not only hugely bad for women, it is bad for every person who lives a life not according to this man's own personal religious beliefs. And remember, the separation of church and state definitely protects the state from the church, but it also protects the church from the state. I don't know why him and others like him cannot see that in their zeal to make everyone live according to their own beliefs, they are doing more harm than good to even their church.
Like Gabriel and Spencer Goydell, who have been trying to have a baby for years and have been diagnosed with unexplained genetic fertility. They just started IVF in Alabama, but don't know whether they will be allowed to continue now with Alabama's court decision.
We really want a family. We've known since we got married that we want children, and this is our best shot.
I think it's just a thoughtless decision. Being so committed to this idea of being pro-life that they're not thinking about how a decision like this affects people trying to start families.
If you are fortunate enough to have little to no experience with IVF, you don't know the layers of fear that are now compounding our ability to have a family, right? And, you know, this happened in Alabama, and depending on what happens in November, this could be a nationwide situation, right? Trump has already said that he supports a nationwide abortion ban. And this is his fault because he very proudly touts the fact that he overturned Roe v. Wade. And because of the Supreme Court justices that he appointed and the fall of Roe, now states have the ability to pass these draconian laws, and we have no idea how far it's going to go. And that's what's absolutely terrifying.
Let us not forget, in this quest for women to be able to control their own bodies and families to be able to bring life into the world the best way that they can, that it was Justice Kavanaugh who said that the states could be trusted with these all-important rights. Most likely that was because he was somebody who has never been subject to having his rights taken away. But please remind me how you're pro-life again.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Meidas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.